Welcome to the Freak Show podcast, hosted by Sam Thurmond and Jacqueline Steele Thurmond. Sam is an Air Force Academy graduate and veteran who, after his service and 2 deployments, escaped the 9-to-5 grind, but building a real estate investing business that has, to date, accounted for over $50 million in real estate transactions. Jacqueline is an award-winning musician, former owner of boutique branding agency Steele International, real estate investor, and designer for luxury multi-million-dollar homes.
We are so excited to welcome you to the Freak Show podcast, where we center our content around the frequency of belief.
Why? Because when we overcome fear and self-doubt, basically by getting out of our own way, we can make the impossible possible.
And in this podcast, we are going to share our favorite mindset tools and life lessons that have completely transformed our lives and businesses. So without further ado, let's get freaky. All right. Welcome back to the Freak Show with Jacqueline Steele Thurmond and...
I am Sam Thurmond.
We're so happy to have you here. This is episode 3. The title of this episode is When You Dream Big, Expect to Be Tested.
Yeah, so last episode we talked about audacious goals, and today we are going to talk about dreaming big and how you could and should expect to be tested when you're going after something big. This may take the form of a battle in your mind or a form of obstacles physically in your way, whatever it is. But if you're doing something big, expect to be tested, right?
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting, I'm going off script here. I'm going to do a book recommendations. There's a book called Manifest by Roxie Nafousi. And the subtitle is 7 Steps to Living Your Best Life. And in fact, if you go to beckonliving.com and post on the post that is related to this podcast, episode 3, just post a comment, you will be entered to win a copy of this book. It is such an important book. It's going to be a stocking stuffer for me to give to so many people this Christmas. But Roxie Nafousi, in these 7 steps, says, step number 1, be clear in your vision. Step number 2, remove fear and doubt. Step number 3, align your behavior. 4, overcome tests from the universe. 5, embrace gratitude without caveats. 6, turn envy into inspiration. And 7, trust in the universe. Those are such incredible and specific ways to talk about manifestation. And I think the reason we wanted to talk about being tested is because we've been tested recently in so many ways. And I think we should probably start off with the story of what happened yesterday when we were in this very studio recording episode number 2.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. So what happened yesterday, let me take a step back. We have been preparing for this podcast. We actually did another podcast
10 episodes
a year ago, and for whatever reason, just didn't feel right or just wasn't.
It wasn't aligned with what we wanted for our business, I think.
Yeah. So we've actually gone through this, and I guess what I'm saying is we've put a lot of preparation into this. There's been a lot of build up, a lot of hype. We wanted to do it, and we've carved out the time to make it happen. And we really have high expectations and some big goals with the podcast, not just the podcast, but what will come from the podcast.
Yeah,
I think
so much deep excitement.
Yeah. So all that to say, it's a big deal for us, and we want it to be big, and we want to do big things. And so
we want to empower a lot of people.
Be expected to be tested. So we come into the podcast studio yesterday, record the trailer, record the intro, record the first episode. Everything's going great. We're in a flow state, and then we start episode 2. And a lot of times, I think when we experience being attacked spiritually or tested, whatever that is, it pits us against each other.
Absolutely.
To where our perspectives or our mindsets or just how we're approaching things, we're bumping heads. And so yesterday, about halfway through the episode that we were recording, you stopped, you paused us, and you gave me some feedback. Now, the the feedback was nothing, that should
I'll just
have,
I'll tell him what I said.
Nothing that should have like really thrown me off.
Gotcha.
But what happened was it just kind of threw me out of my rhythm, and what I was feeling like was a pretty good flow. And so then we were unable to get back on the same page, and it was just a struggle and a fight to kind of, it just made things clunky. And, the energy just completely shifted. Yeah. And, so unfortunately we had to come back and re-record, but we left the studio, we kind of get into an argument. We're trying to get on the same page. And then I think you mentioned right when we're about to get home this is going to be big. We both love each other. We both want this to be top notch. So we're just being tested, right? We're being attacked in this scenario. And it's just something that we have to overcome. And I think that really diffused the situation to where we could both just take a breath and say, you're right. Now, how do we move forward? How do we work through it? But in the moment, all this buildup,
it's so frustrating.
We're in the studio and getting this thing done that we've been wanting to do for a long time. And it kind of just felt like the wind was taken out of our sails a little bit.
Yeah. And I apologize. I did not intend to take the wind out of your sails, but I can totally understand why you felt that way in the moment. Yeah.
All good.
So I think as we go about living on the frequency of belief and walking toward or running toward our audacious goals, talking about what happens when you are in that process is super important. And like we said, we should expect to be tested. And sometimes these tests are just little things, but we have to recognize them for what they are and refuse to let them steer us off course. And it's important to understand too, that these tests appear for a reason. They're not just testing to test. Sometimes, there is spiritual warfare. I will not deny that, but also sometimes it's just us getting in our own way. But these tests appear for a reason, and that's because they build our resilience and our strength, and they show us our own level of self-worth. They're a mirror in some ways. And in our experience, we can only attract what we feel worthy of. And tests, just like weightlifting, make us stronger and give us an opportunity to actively practice higher levels of self-worth. Self-worth is something that I have talked about in depth on my other podcast, Self-Worth with Jacqueline Steele, because I feel like when you make an audacious goal, no matter how audacious it is, no matter how hard you work, no matter how much the universe, God partners with you to make that happen, if you don't feel worthy of it, you will self-sabotage your way out of getting it, even when you are a hair's width away of achieving it. Mm-hmm. So we have to be aware of our self-worth, and these tests are just proof that we're going in the right direction. So they don't even have to be negative, like one iota of negativity. Thank you. No, so what are some other examples of tests that we've experienced, do you think? I love a good example.
Well, I think two things. So whenever you start something new, start a new venture or whatever it is, you're going to be tested constantly. And that's basically just because you haven't done it before. You don't have the experience. You don't have the tools yet. So day in, day out, you're going to get tested. I can remember early on, like one of the first rental properties we had, every time that it rained, and it rains a lot in springtime in Georgia, every time it rained, my anxiety went through the roof.
Oh, I remember
because
this.
Bristol Cone. It was a duplex that would flood anytime that it rained. And it might have been our first property.
It might have been,
yeah. And
our house would flood when it rained really heavily too.
Yeah, but it's one thing when it's your own house, but anyway, so the duplex would flood, and I didn't know how to fix it, though I tried. We didn't have the money to pay somebody to fix it. So literally we're over there filling sandbags, digging ditches, trenches, trying to divert this water from the property. And it's just trial after trial after trial. Yeah. And we picked up quite a few properties early on. So there were those tests multiplied times 100 because we weren't buying at that point the nicest properties on the block by any means. So we were taking on all of these challenges. But my gosh, in some ways, like it could have definitely put us under or broken us. But the amount, that's the other thing, the amount that we learned in such a compressed period of time because we were getting tested. You know, we had to go to court. We got sued. We had to stop the flooding. We had all of this stuff that just happened.
Down to the ground.
A house burned down the day that it was supposed to sell. I mean, it was.
But that ended up being the best provisional thing.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah. It was just all these things constantly. And, you know, you start to ask yourself, you're like, man, am I just bad at this? Am I doing something wrong? So that's when the doubt can creep in when you start facing those tests and facing those challenges. But as long as you just push through them and you survive, you come out the other end and you're stronger. And then the next time that something like that happens, it's just not even that big of a deal. You just move straight forward. Mm-hmm. Or even better, you just start avoiding those scenarios altogether because you see the writing on the wall. You're able to
trust your gut.
Yeah, and you're able to make better decisions and avoid them. So those kind of tests that happen early on whenever you're starting out, those were huge. And they still happen to this day, but you're just better. We're better equipped
so much better equipped
to manage through them.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
I think one thing that has helped us survive lots of different hardships is having each other. And I remember at one point or another, you referred to me as like your Viking wife. Mm-hmm. And I like to refer to you too as like my Viking husband. Like you're going to fight for me. I'm going to fight for you. And when you forget who you are, I'm going to remind you. And when I forget who I am, you're going to remind me. Yep. So you don't need a romantic partner to do this with, but you are who you hang out with. And you are who you let into your inner circle. So when you are doing something new, keep in mind that having support and somebody who has your back and who will remind you of who you are when you need to be reminded, and be vulnerable enough to say, hey, I'm feeling very delicate right now. Remind me of who I am. Mm-hmm. Having that person as a sounding board is invaluable. Absolutely.
Yep. Iron sharpens iron. The number 2, as far as some tests, I would call complacency a test.
Ooh,
and
yes.
The reason for that is complacency leads to inconsistency. And I'll speak, you could apply that to relationship. Yeah. You could apply that to business, whatever. But complacency leads to inconsistency because in terms of a business, when you hit a certain level, I think a lot of times it's natural to want to take your foot off the gas because you just spent the last 4 years filling sandbags and digging ditches, right? So you're like, oh man, I need to kick back a little bit. I've made it. I'm to a level of comfort that I can just chill a little bit and relax. But what happens when you do that is I listened to Ed Milet this morning and he talked about echoes, and what he was saying with that was you sow the seeds in your business 30, 60, 90, 120 days out, sometimes 6 months out. So if you are not putting the work in and putting the effort in or doing the things that you need to do today and overcoming that complacency, you're going to pay the price for it 30, 60, 90, 6 months down the road, because that's when the echo hits, whether it's a positive or a negative. If you put the work in, you're going to reap the rewards. If you don't put it in, you're going to have to deal with the inconsistency or with whatever comes from taking your foot off the gas. So
I feel like that's convicting for me because I feel like that is one of the areas in my life, that muscle that I would really like to strengthen is consistency. And I feel like this year I have been more consistent than I have ever been.
Yeah.
And it's not ever that I'm lazy. it's self-sabotage.
Yeah.
Like, I love to work hard, but there are moments where I will allow self-sabotage to take over and create inconsistencies in my routine and in my work.
Well, we have a tendency to overcomplicate things too, and I think that happens a lot when it comes to consistency, because we want to feel like there's this big complex problem that we need to solve, and all we really need to do is just get up and chop wood every day and do the simple tasks that lead to the result.
Yeah. When I was songwriting full time, the best songwriters in the world say, just show up and write every single day. Don't wait for inspiration to strike. You sit at the piano, or you sit at the guitar, you sit with your notebook and you write every single day. Chop wood every single day. You chop vegetables every single day. Yeah.
And to reference our previous, and I know we got to keep it moving, but to reference the previous episode when we were talking about 50th Street.
Yeah.
And how you got that fantastic deal for us, and it was a killer deal, but all the work that led up to that and kind of the back and forth between us was, I just kept trying to hammer home that, hey, you just need to talk to X many, 3-4 wholesalers a day. As long as you do that every day, we will ultimately have as many deals as we need over time. And I think in your mind, it
wasn't happening fast enough.
Yeah, it wasn't happening fast enough. You weren't seeing the fruits of that input. You weren't seeing the output yet. So it was kind of hard for you to wrap your head around that. Oh man, this could potentially take 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and it took almost 8.
Yeah, but once it happens, once it clicks, you're like, okay, got it. All right, well that's simple. You know, it's that's easy, the easy button. But anyway, I think that's the trick of overcoming the complacency, is just having those things, or those certain tasks that you can just measure daily, that have to get done. If you get them done, it's a win. If they don't, then you'll have to pay for it down the road.
Yeah. Tests show up all the time. And I feel like, especially after a fantastic day or a big win, I can't even tell you how many times I've had a big win, and the next day there's like a heaviness hangover that I'm sure is fueled by self-sabotage, because I'm chasing that feeling of being, that high feeling of accomplishment. And so the next day, I automatically want to feel that same feeling. And if I don't feel it, there's a sense of heaviness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially in real estate, because you get
high highs and lows.
Yeah, you get those big swings, and then it's like an addict. It's like a drug. You feel you want it every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, if you were at our house and we're not taking care of our son, chances are you would find us looking at homes or looking at deals or doing something real estate related, because we genuinely love it. Mm-hmm. And I want to give you guys an example of a test. And this is just something, it's minute, but the way that you react makes all the difference. So Sam and I, earlier this year, purchased this gorgeous Spanish style home. We got it owner financed at 3%. The stars aligned, and we have been renovating it since April. We're about to move into it in November. So, about 7 months of renovation, which is very, very reasonable. But the cool thing is, Spanish style home was all over my vision board. It has been for years. And here we are renovating our dream home. And I'm very hands-on. I've been designing the home for months. Every single inch of this home has like love and energy in it. And I've been coordinating all the renovation efforts and finding cool vendors and resources. Everything is just very, very customized, right? And we've had all sorts of tests along the way, figuring out how to pay for things that were more expensive than we anticipated, addressing fears late at night when they creep in about money, timelines, projections, etc. Anyway, one of the tests I experienced recently has to do with a bunch of materials I ordered directly from Morocco. And these materials were taking a lot longer than we anticipated, like weeks and weeks longer. And they are the linchpin in the progress of our home. So other things in the house can't be installed until we have these pieces to do them, right? Everything is kind of chronological when it comes to a renovation. And some of the most insidious tests are the ones that show up in the form of self-sabotage. And what I'm referring to here is over these fixtures, and it was a minute, kind of silly thing considering what's going on in the world, but our brains don't always make logical sense at 3 a.m. But I woke up with this feeling like, oh my gosh, are these items from Morocco ever going to get here? Because it's going to delay the countertop installation. It's going to delay the tiling. It's going to delay the painting. It's going to delay the installation of the doors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My mind started running. Then I started thinking like, I need to contact our landlord right now so that we can stay here longer because we're not going to be able to get our move-in date, blah, 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 blah. And it was one of those things where I made it out to be this huge, giant, hairy, awful thing. And Sam was like, if you can take a step back and just put things into perspective, everything is going to turn out the way that it's supposed to. And when he said that to me, I calmed down. And then the beautiful thing happened was I believed it. I got back on the frequency of belief, like everything's going to be fine. It's all going to happen as it's supposed to. And the next morning, I woke up with a text message from the supplier in Morocco saying, hey, your items are being shipped out today. So, yeah, some of the most insidious tests are the ones that show up in us believing our own fears and our own self-doubt. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that and the only reason I can give you that advice is because you've given me that advice, and we kind of go back and forth when the other person is spinning off the rails a little bit. Usually the other person is more grounded and able to calm the other person down. But I think a lot of times we create a lot of our tests in our mind by doing stuff just like that. It's like, well, you know what? You can't do anything about it anyway. I'm sure that he'll get back to you in the morning. So one, just allow yourself not to even have to go through this and deal with this right now, and control what you can control, and otherwise just move on. But I think that self-sabotage is so important to recognize and to kind of do a personal audit often, or someone close to you that knows you that can kind of speak to you in a way that you can hear and understand, have them give you that feedback. Or even, it doesn't have to be someone that's super close to you. Sometimes it's easier for someone that is not close to you to give you that kind of feedback and even have that kind of perspective, to give you that feedback off of, hey, I see you doing this. I see you going down this trail. Maybe don't do that because it's leading to a little bit of self-sabotage. And I think for me, and I think you would agree with this, what that can look like for me is I can easily get distracted by opportunities outside of our business partnership. Like if someone hits me up with,
I'm glad you're talking about this.
If someone hits me up with an opportunity over here, there's something in me that's like, oh man, I got to go run and chase that down. And I think that it's something to do with my self-worth, in that I need to show that person that I can make this happen.
Ooh, okay.
And I'm looking for their validation I'm looking for validation from them, to tell me that, oh man, I can go to Sam and Sam can figure this out, or Sam can connect the dots, or whatever it is. And so I'm looking for that validation outside of what we're doing. And then it distracts me from all the awesome projects that we have going on and growing our business. And I get focused on things that can just be a waste of time, or that ultimately just aren't going to be as valuable if I just focused on our stuff.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I kind of see what's happening and I get frustrated. So it causes, not always, but it can cause some friction in our relationship. And again, I think if we look at that from an aerial perspective, we have such big, audacious goals for Beckon and what we want to do with our business, with this podcast, with other businesses that we want to create within Beckon. And because that is such a big, hairy, audacious goal, we're going to be tested. We're going to be tested as a couple, and we're going to be tested as individuals. And that's an individual test for you.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm so glad that you shared that.
Yeah.
So yeah, self-sabotage can be brutal. And I think it's worth talking about what to look for in ourselves so our listeners will recognize what these self-sabotage tactics are and what these tests are and how we can move forward and overcome them. So I would say it's simple and it's just a check-in. You can start by asking yourself, like, what feeling do you have right now? Is this feeling high frequency or is it low frequency? Do you feel like you're being tested? Could it be? Your inner knowing is so incredibly powerful, and the answers will bubble up if you ask these questions. I would say step number 2 is recognize whatever is going on for what it is. Is it a test? Is it self-sabotage? Is it an obstacle that you can overcome that will make you stronger? Is it a lesson to be learned? Is it self-sabotage masking as excuses or distractions or whatever? Getting honest with ourselves and moving from that place of honesty changes the game. And then number 3, I would say, ask yourself if you're settling. Are you settling for the result, for the job, for the friendship, for the relationship, for the whatever? If in your heart you feel like you are settling, it's a test. You do not have to settle. And I'm going to repeat that again. You do not have to settle. And when you hold out for what truly feels aligned and you refuse to settle for second best, it will reinforce, again, your resilience, your self-worth, and just how incredible real manifestation and living on the frequency of belief is. So when you are feeling self-sabotagey, when you are feeling like you are being tested, ask yourself, what feeling do you have right now? Do you really feel like you're being tested? Then recognize whatever is going on for what it is. Can you learn from this? What can you take from it? And then lastly, ask yourself if you're settling. If you are walking down this path, does it feel like you are settling for second best? Because you do not need to settle for second best. Okay, I think we should wrap up with some questions, my love.
Awesome. Yeah, let's do it. So here they are. Are you experiencing any tests right now? And this is for the audience. Sorry, I should clarify.
Yes.
Are you experiencing any tests right now? Can you recognize them as a lesson and as evidence that you are getting closer and closer to reaching your goals? I think that's important. Like you said when we started out, if you're being tested, it's evidence that you are moving in the right direction or that you're making progress. And number 2, what does self-sabotage look like for you? It's very important that we audit this with ourselves and make sure that we are open and honest, because that's where progress comes from. That's where growth comes from. And really we are the only thing holding ourselves back. There's not some external force that is keeping us where we are. It all comes down to us and we have control. So how are you self-sabotaging? What does that look like for you?
Thank you so much for listening to The Freak Show with Sam Thurmond and me, Jacqueline Steele Thurmond. We would love to connect with you via our website, beckonliving.com, and on social media.
You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Beck and Living, and you can join our email list to receive uplifting messages, podcast and business updates, and discounts on high-frequency products just for our freaky community.
Cheers to high-frequency living.